Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Talk with CastleHill Risk. Today, it's a podcast dedicated to the business of risk management. And today we have John Liggett, the CEO and founder of SixLambda. So thank you, John, for joining us. And please, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Tim, thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. Enjoy some coffee. I'm John Liggett. I'm the founder and CEO of SixLambda. SixLambda is a company that I started about 2.5 years ago, focused on political contribution monitoring, primarily for the financial industry, but also for other people that have government contracts and things like that would where they would have pay-to-play regulation that they need to comply with.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So that is going to be the topic, of course, of today's podcast. We're going to talk about election 2020 and the pay-to-play regulations. So that's a term that it's a colloquialism, certainly, for how the regulations are interpreted. Tell us a little bit about pay-to-play, John, and what those regulations are about, and political contributions, and all those
Sure, I'd
great
love
things.
to. So pay-to-play rules broadly came into force back in 2011. A lot of them had to do around with increasingly financial firms were doing business with state pension funds and other government entities, mainly state and local, where they managed money for, whether it's like Texas teachers or Los Angeles firefighters, and for places that had state connections. And that we're trying to do was to get rid of any sort of semblance of conflict of interest between the financial managers, whether it's mutual funds, hedge funds, RIAs, which are all SEC regulated, or the banks, whether you're representing a municipal issuer in a muni bond deal. They wanted to make sure that campaign finance funds were not flowing from individuals who worked at those firms who could benefit from their relationships with those firms and influence the outcomes of the election through political contributions. And so broadly, the SEC passed a rule, it's 2064-5, which prohibited making contributions to state and local authorities where there was a relationship in place, or there was the potential, or the firm was soliciting business from those state and local governments. The FINRA rule, which is Rule 2030, really parallels pretty much the SEC rule. And then the MSRB has Rule G37, which broadly prohibits brokers, dealers, and municipal bond dealers from engaging in business if they make political contributions to municipal officials. And then the CFTC has their own rule, 23451, which prohibits entering into swaps with entities where you've made a political contribution in the past 2 years. The fines and for violating these rules can be pretty onerous. While the fines that actually have been imposed by regulatory authorities for enforcement action in this space are relatively low, the real cost is that you're disbarred from collecting any management fees, performance fees, any sort of fee for a period of 2 years looking back. So you may have to forfeit fees. And so those are the real risks to the firm. So, you can imagine if you manage money for a state and local pension fund, giving back 2 years worth of management and performance fees could be a mighty large amount of money to have to disgorge.
That's what you want to do for California or somewhere like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what typically happens in a firm nowadays, or before our product came to the market, was that most firms have a pay-to-play policy, right? So, and that policy says that they're going to do mandatory and repetitive training and reminders about the rules, like do not give, and it's what they're trying to teach their people. Or if they allow their employees to give, then they need to pre-clear those transactions. They need to ask their compliance officers, like, I want to give X amount of money to the governor's race in Pennsylvania. Am I allowed to do it? And then the compliance officer is supposed to say, yes, that's okay, or no, we're trying to do business with the state of Pennsylvania, you're not allowed to do it. And what became clear was that there was no real verification layer in the market. There was no way of detecting when someone did something without asking permission. So my background is, I'd worked in investment banking right out of college at Bear Stearns. I worked at a hedge fund in New York called Faro, which is an emerging market macro fund. We'd grown I was employee number 6, we grew to 60 people. And so I'd really been involved in a lot of the operations of building an asset management firm and the compliance functions, the risk functions. And after leaving Faro to move down to Philadelphia for various reasons, I went to work and helped a family invest in private equity and hedge funds. And we were doing diligence on one of these funds that had suffered a pay-to-play violation. And in the operational due diligence, it was pretty clear that they had no way of catching what had happened. The employee hadn't pre-cleared the transaction. He hadn't self-disclosed it on their quarterly disclosure forms. And the SEC picked up on the violation. It was not a large amount of money. It was $500 given in the state of Massachusetts. And they went on to pay a fine, obviously, and also had to disgorge management fees and performance fees from that client. A lot of times in the enforcement actions the SEC publishes, they don't publish the fact that those fines or those disgorgements have occurred, but we understand that they did actually occur in most of those circumstances. So what they said from that operation of due diligence was, look, we can't have our compliance officers running through all of these state and local databases because all of this contribution information is widely publicly available. It's just in 100 different sources. It's at city databases, it's at county databases, it's at state databases. And so to build a program around collecting and verifying that, like you would with trading, trading, you say you can't make trades internally without asking permission. But on top of that, they're normally monitoring your brokerage account, making sure you're not adding trades. That didn't exist in pay-to-play. So we built a set of tools that would let us go through each of these sources every day, scrape the new transactions, centralize them into one database so that you could query and search your employees' activity on a daily basis and hopefully, monitor and verify what was actually going on in the public record.
Awesome. It's a really interesting space overall. It's we do a lot of work with regulatory change management at CastleHill, right? So this is the flip side of it, of actually doing the monitoring, the proactive review of that information. I think you've mentioned before that also, even if someone is identified as having given a contribution, they can revert that contribution or get it back in time.
Yeah. So the information on that is a little. The SEC's made statements that generally any contribution that is discovered within 4 months of it being discoverable can be self-reported and remediated, hopefully, like try to get the contribution returned, document the facts and circumstances around which it occurred, show that you were using some sort of program or methodology to catch this and show that why your compliance system worked. And you can hopefully get a get out of jail free card at least once, if you violated the rule and it was not malicious, for sure. Most of the regulatory findings that have been in the space where there's been violations, most of them are not malicious. They were just done because someone had a friend running for a state office or local office, or their neighbor was running for town council or city council or mayor, and they were friendly with them and they made the contribution without thinking about the consequences of that. And but there are real consequences. Now, at the times there have been malicious violations, in the case the fines have been much more egregious for the actors.
It's hard for people to remember that there is no personal when you're in the asset management space.
Right.
There's not. If you're moving money around, that's something which is going to get investigated. So
Yeah.
a lot of people know it,
No, absolutely.
but some forget.
And this year in particular is, there's been a much more giving than any election in the history of the United States, especially at the federal level. Federal contributions don't pose as much risk as state and local contributions for financial firms, mainly because no one really managed money for the federal government. That's done by the Treasury. There are circumstances where you have people running for federal office that currently hold state office. So a good case in point was when Kasich was running for president in 2016. He was governor of Ohio at the time. And actually, I think BlackRock tripped up on this because they had one person who was contributing to Kasich, and they obviously, BlackRock is involved everywhere. And I'm not exactly sure the outcome of that. I think it was settled, but there are those circumstances where those are at risk because that person still has the ability to influence state and local politics while they're running for federal office.
Yep. I think that's what's a great thing about your tool is the fact that it's taking out that whole onus of actually going and finding the information, and actually now you can actually do something with the information for those edge cases or ones that more the compliance team would be aware of. Not the
right. And we tried to set it up like I came from finance world, and I had daily trade blotters when I was trading currencies and whatnot, and we really tried to set this up as kind of a reconciliation system so that you could see what we found, you could take action on it, and you could document that the fact that you're going through each of these transactions and matching it up and taking notes on it. And that way, when you go in for any sort of regulatory exam, you could offer proof of your program pretty easily. Like, here's where we went through everything. Here's it's confirmed. Here are the notes we took on it. Everything's exportable, so you can export it to Excel and sort through it. And so we wanted to really create a tool that was easy. So the difficult part of this is that if you have common names are a problem. There's no self-identifiable information. I mean, there's not like great information. It's not like you have a birth date, a social security number in the public record. It's just a name and an address most of the time. Maybe an employer, but not always. The data is very messy at the state and local level. And so we have a lot of tools where we try to deal with that messiness. Whether it's, if you put in a nickname or a formal name, we'll also search all the nicknames that person may go by. And when we're using address matching, we do some fuzziness around the address match so that you don't get all the John Smiths in the state of Ohio. We try to draw some, kind of geographic circles around that person and just say, we just want the people that lived here. And then we can handle multiple addresses and that kind of stuff. So it helps cut down on the false positives that you may get from your own search. And then finally, we make the tools so it's very easy to eliminate quickly false positives on a massive scale. So if you have if the John Smith that lives in Rye, New York is never the John Smith because your John Smith lives in Greenwich or in, New York City or something like that, you can eliminate all the Rye New Yorks very quickly. Just one button, they're all gone. So you can get to the details you need very quickly. So the idea is we're trying to make it so the compliance officers have to spend as little time as possible in our system.
And this is all public information that you're getting, right? But it's the fact that it's so dispersed and it's so convoluted at each of these different organizations, right? That's the big challenge.
It is the challenge. So every day a different scraper's endpoint changes. So the state moves the ball on you. And so you need to have tools for catching that. They change the format of their data. You've got to go in and catch that. There are, sometimes the database is just down. So you can't really do anything with that. The idea, though, is that we're trying to catch it as soon as it's publicly available. because we're trying to get it within that window of like, if you have the information as quickly as possible, you can remediate an error as quickly as possible. A lot of the public websites that have some of this information, like Open Secrets only deals with federal data. So they only have the federal data, which is also widely available at fec.gov. We bring down the federal data as well. And 95% or maybe even more, 99% of the contributions that occur are at the federal level. But it's those state and local ones that kind of matter the most. And those are the ones that are more complicated to get. So like California, for instance, they report at the state level for state contributions. And then they have city databases for each city. And then they have county databases for each county. So actually gathering all that California information is a very difficult task. If you go to back to my point on the public websites, Follow the Money also collects some of the state and local data for sure. Great guys, have a great mission. We know those guys well. They can gather that information a lot of times for helping to do policy around state and local campaigns. So they've got a great program where they've helped small donor matching, where they use that data to figure out like, how can we flip money in politics at the state and local level so that candidates are encouraged to get smaller donors to help them finance their campaigns by doing matching in that situation. And but because of that, their data is, you know, sometimes 3 to 4 to 6 months old. So you're not going to get the contributions as quickly as you want. And you know, we created a system where you can enter all the names once and then consistently monitor, versus like having to type in the name every time you want to do a search and then go through all of them over again.
You've turned it into a preventive control versus a detective control, right? It's
Exactly.
you're there in front of the curve. So
exactly.
Yep. Just before we talk about sort of how companies are using this, do you see anything from the future perspective, right? So I know this is, as you mentioned, right, we have a massive amount of money going into this election from different contribution sources and different capabilities. Do you have any opinions on where it's headed after this?
Yeah, so we've talked about ways to make compliance even more effective in this space. You know, it's one thing to catch it after it's happened. It'd be better to be able to catch it before it happens, and that's what pre-clearance is really supposed to do. But it's not foolproof in any way. So we have some ideas around like building maybe some black boxes to capture the contributions first before they're released to the candidates. So that's something we've been thinking about. There's, you know, all of this information is public. So anytime you make a contribution, you're pretty much allowing all of that information to be, you know, disclosed in the public record. Your home address is there, right? The amount you gave, that you're kind of, you know, inherently everyone then knows your political leaning, you know, and so
sign you've got on the front lawn.
What's that?
What sign you've got on the front lawn? That's
exactly. You're on the front lawn. You know, it's out there for people to know, and it's out there for companies to, you know, for the companies they work for. So, you know, if you're, I'll just take someone like Apple. It's pretty easy to go through the FEC database, find all the Apple employees who are contributing, and then actually plow that back through the state and local database and figure out where they're doing state and locally. And so that information is available, and if you don't know about it, the odds are someone will figure it out for you. And you know, so it's good to just understand, you know, your exposure, I think, on these fronts.
Especially with all the data privacy regulations at the state level coming through, and but of course the government typically exempts themselves from those privacy regulations, but it's still going to continue to be a problem as they get more mature.
Essentially you're saying when you're involved in politics in any way, you're giving up your right to privacy. You know, so it's all there. The other place that we found that increasingly people are using the data is at the government contracting level. If you have, and this, if you're doing business with the U.S. government in any way, you know, if you're a pharmaceutical company now, you know, millions of dollars are going to vaccine companies and whatnot. that exposure is real for you, that political exposure and what you're giving. If you're building roads for states and local governments, you have that exposure. If you have defense contracts, you have exposure to the political giving of your candidates. So this is all it's all a real risk, and even if it's not a real conflict, it's the semblance of a conflict can be enough to cause a lot of headache for you.
Yep. It reminds me a lot of the early days of the trade monitoring, right? So as that became more and more automated and the ability to do that, it took a while for behavior to change, but then once it did, you knew that you weren't going to get past it because of the monitoring tools like SixLambda. So that's a great
opportunity. No, if you didn't want to be the person who got called in because you forgot to clear something and they knew about it,
Yep.
We're looking into other segments too, where we can use this data and other data sets that we're working on to provide more proactive monitoring and information to compliance officers to make rapid decisions around not only political contributions, but other potential conflicts of interest. Yep. Outside business interests, for instance, or charitable contributions and this kind of stuff.
Yep. I think it's a great tool in the arsenal, right? So with CastleHill, one of our offerings, or how we bundle this type of information into the offering, is to make sure that monitoring that's actually happening actually makes it up to the case management tools or the issue management tools, so that the right people are actually getting the visibility for it. I think that's why it's such a great opportunity to use this information, because to your point, right, many of these contributions will only be disclosed in the next several months.
Right.
There is no up or down time, or there's not going to be any more up or down time in the future because of those things. So,
and soon as this election's over, moving into fundraising for the midterm election, and a lot of state and local elections are actually off cycle from presidential and federal elections. So that's important to remember too.
Yep. And you're at a local level, right? So that's the other piece of it. So
exactly.
Your example of some of those larger companies that have an employee who's just happens to be in a small town in a place and is helping the mayor with his campaign. That's a significant risk in those situations. So,
absolutely.
Yep. Awesome. So I guess the last big question for you is, so you mentioned part of it already, right? I can easily see this being used outside of the asset management space. Anybody who's doing business with a local government or a federal government or a state level government. And have you seen any conversation about how a lot of the funding that's come through from a federal and a state perspective, like New York City, right? Businesses are getting a lot of money. Are they then turning around and providing that money back as a contribution to different campaigns or other things of that sort?
We haven't done a lot of work.
Not that I'm giving people ideas.
Yeah. No. So New York City did pass some disclosure laws around, campaign finance, and if you're doing business with a city, you need to disclose who you're giving to and that kind of stuff. So those rules already exist for sure for even if you're providing public housing or doing something like that in New York City. There are conflict of interest laws that encompass pay-to-play regulation for those. And so it's important to note that, it's not just the RIAs and banks out there that have this issue. But, increasingly as the lines are blurred between government and business, I think these conflicts will become more apparent, and the case in point being buying, 1 million vaccines sight unseen, or, having your drug approved by the FDA, or, winning the, CIA cloud hosting contract, the Microsoft Amazon deal, like politics and business are intricately entwined, and unfortunately maybe more so than they ever have been. And so, understanding where you stand on that front is important. There's a group at University of Pennsylvania called it's the Zicklin. And they do like a Fortune 500 disclosure for large businesses where they need to disclose their political relationships and their political giving. And I think firms, along with the ESG mandates they have, where they're trying to be more they're trying to disclose, how much carbon, their carbon footprints and whatnot. As part of the governance part of that, I think a lot of them and the social component of that are trying to be more transparent into their relationships with the government and
Yep.
what they're supporting.
Yep.
And I also think on the public pension side, when you're a public pension, you kind of want to know the kind of the leanings of your money managers, because sometimes having a money manager that maybe leans differently than your base of pensioners or your base of donors may not always sit well with your boards and whatnot. So I think it's important for them to know if they're invested in someone who heavily leans left or heavily leans right or supports gun rights or doesn't support gun rights. Like those are issues that can be discovered by by understanding what the employees are doing at these firms, especially the principals.
Yep. Like the gentleman at Citi recently, right? So
Yep.
the data is out there, which is really what's one of the interesting things. I think you're so far ahead of the curve in terms of looking at that data and bringing the information together and using those tools that are out there for, like I said, Trade Blotter and all those pieces that are very well established. But now you're bringing this set of data together in a way that's really interesting. It's like I said, it reminds me of a number of different parts of the risk management space that we had multiple years ago. Cybersecurity, as we started to be able to monitor those areas much more closely. Now it's an incident happened, we need to react to the incident, not, oh crap, the regulators are coming and we need to go and deal with it from that perspective. It's not too late.
It's just on that front, and this may be a little bit of a side, but since we're having coffee, I figured we could talk about it. Yep. One of the things that's very important when you're doing business with financial firms is cybersecurity and your own cybersecurity posture as a vendor for these companies, right? And there's been a lot of learning from our side on how to have an effective security posture, cybersecurity posture, because we are dealing with our clients. PPP, PII, sorry, personal identifiable information. And that's very important data to these firms. Some of them have highly paid, highly compensated employees that they want to keep. They don't necessarily want all their names out there. And so we've tried to make the system as secure as possible. We're just completing our first SOC 2 audit. So, had a pen test recently, and cybersecurity is a very important thing to these firms. And we realize when we're holding this information, while a lot of it is public, right? So if they're disclosing their employer, but there are people who don't make contributions who are still very private, and you don't want that out there. So one of the reasons we designed the system we did is we don't want to be passing searches to these databases and then pulling that information out, because when you pass a search, you're implicitly hitting a database with a name, and so you're giving that name out in the public. So therefore, we pull everything to our old database, and then when we query it, it's never leaving our system. So you don't know who we're looking up when we look it up.
Yep. No one can reverse engineer your client list, in effect, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. All right. I know we're just about running out of time. So anything, John, that we didn't get to, certainly if maybe just let people know your website and just how to get in touch.
So the company is SixLambda.com, SixLambda, LAMBDA. Tim asked me earlier before we got on here what Lambda stood for. And so Lambda is a recursive function in computer science. In my immediate family, we've got 4 kids, and my wife and I, so I just came up with a name and kind of said, sounds cool, let's use that. One of our salespeople one time was on the phone with someone, and they said, hi, this is SixLambda. And the lady goes, oh, hi, Six, nice to meet you. That's such a cool name. So she thought her name was actually SixLambda. So anyway, so we're on SixLambda.com, and I'm available, John, Jon, at SixLambda.com if you want to email me. Happy to be a help if we can.
Excellent.
Thanks for having me,
John. I really appreciate taking it. No problem.
Yep.
Have a great day. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the coffee. Thanks all.